We know that Joseph, Jesus' foster father, was a carpenter. In all likelihood, Jesus would have been very, very familiar with the craft and the artistry of woodworking. He probably would have grown up learning from his father the trade. Probably spent much of his young adult and maybe even adult life pursuing the trade of carpentry. We're not sure, but the likelihood is Jesus also was a carpenter. But here's the surprising thing. In all of the sayings, all of the stories, and all of the parables that Jesus offers, only twice is there a reference to woodworking. In all of his parables, there are lots of references to farming. There are a lot of references to finance. There are a lot of references to being shepherds or tending animals. There are a lot of references to all of the other jobs and professions and ways of life that would have been common to the people of his day. Bakers and fishermen, you name it. Jesus talks about all of them, but only twice does he use a metaphor or an image that he would have learned in the workshop with Joseph. One of them, actually, we'll hear next week in the gospel. It's that famous line about not judging people, where Jesus says, "Why are you trying to get the speck out of someone else's eye, the little speck of wood, the little splinter of wood, when you yourself have a big beam, a wooden beam in your own eye?" It's this ridiculous metaphor for not judging. And today we hear another one. The measure with which you measure will be measured back to you. There's an old phrase, measure twice, cut once. You ever heard this phrase? Anyone who's ever done any construction or handyman work, or if you're like me and you enjoy the occasional woodworking, well, I actually measure 3 or 4 times because I'm not good at it. But to make his point, he ends his sayings today with that line, the measure with which you measure will be measured back to you. See, he's talking about something that we oftentimes might not want to think about. Jesus is talking about hell. Jesus is talking about the final judgment. Jesus is talking about how God is going to judge us. This is not something that I preach much about, but we know, we've heard many of our brothers and sisters in our Christian faith, sometimes it's all they talk about. They're constantly talking about hell. They're constantly talking about God's wrath and God's judgment. But the thing is, now stop for a minute and think about the last time you heard someone talking about judgment and hell. Normally, it's a long list of rules. Normally it's this deep list of moral rules about do this, don't do that, and it also comes along with the idea of you better agree with my theology or you're going to hell. This is what the Christian message so often is perverted and turned into. But that's not what Jesus is saying. That's a made-up message. Maybe it's shocking to some, I'm sorry, sometimes I get a little crazy. But it's not what Jesus is saying. Listen again to what he said. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Lend freely. Be extreme in your generosity. If you are attacked, insulted, or cursed, return a blessing instead. If someone is opposed to you, do not be opposed to them. Rather, pray for them. Show them love and kindness. Because when God judges us, returns that which we've given away. Jesus makes it very clear. The measure you measure will be measured back to you. He makes it very clear. If you don't want to be judged by God, don't judge anyone else. If you want to receive mercy from God, be merciful to everyone else. Stop judging, and you won't be judged. Can you imagine this? Let's stop for a second. Think about this. Think about all the artwork and all the images and all the sermons that you may have heard at some point in your life about this incredible vision of great, all-consuming divine wrath. And realize that's not what Jesus taught. Very clearly, he's saying, if you don't judge anyone, I won't judge you. If you condemn no one, I won't condemn you. If you forgive, I will forgive you. Do you realize we have the ability to determine the final judgment for our lives? We can decide which judgment will be ours. This is the power of our free will. This is what Jesus is saying. The measure you measure will be measured back to you. If you want to enter eternal life without any speed bumps, without any delays, without any worries, judge no one. Condemn no one. Forgive everyone. Show limitless generosity, kindness, and love. And when you go before the Father in that terrible moment of judgment, the Father's going to say, come on in. You judged no one. I won't judge you. You forgave everyone. I'll forgive you. This is the power of God's justice. If you hear someone preaching a message that God's response to our struggle to live well is a response of wrath and judgment, rules and cruelty, you have to think in your heart, maybe not say anything. Remember this parable. Remember these words. Do not despair, because when all is said and done, when the value and the quality of our lives, when the worth of our discipleship, when the love of our hearts and the struggle with our sin, we all have a struggle, when we end up struggling, when we end up loving, when we try to live well, when we desire for holiness and we fall and we stumble and we strive and we get up and all of this glorious, joyful mess of life, when all is said and done, when we know we could have been better, but golly, we gave it our best, when you reach that moment, when the end comes, and it will, and judgment is here, and judgment does come for everyone, and we stand before the powers of hell and the glories of heaven, and we wonder and we worry, how shall it go? Be assured. Be comforted. The measure with which you measure in that moment will be measured back to you.